So I'm going to record so you can listen back to if you want to go back over anything, okay? So you're doing foundation here, aren't you, Jack?
Yeah.
Perfect. So I've cut out anything that you don't need, okay? Now, this is your specification here. Now, you should be relatively familiar with it. You've definitely seen it before, okay? Now, the science specification, there's actually loads of information in this here, and it will tell you exactly what you need to know, but they also have definitions, and that goes with your chemistry and your physics as well, okay? So do have a read through this here. Now, we're not going to do that now, but like literally, if there's something you go, oh God, I haven't a clue what that means, text me and I'll go back through it with you, okay? So you have about 7 different points we have to know. So we'll try to make it as short as we can and keep it to the absolute bare minimum of what you need to know. So the first thing you have to know is, right, well, what is your circulatory system? So when you think of circulatory system, what do you think of, Jack?
The blood and how the body works.
Absolutely. So it's about the blood, okay? So if you think of the blood has like what has to get around your body, right? Why do you need blood? What is the blood actually doing?
Carrying oxygen.
Brilliant. And how does it carry oxygen? What part of the blood? Any idea?
No. Is it hemoglobin?
Yeah, that's a part of it, absolutely. So when you think of blood, right, you think of this red stuff when you get a cut that comes out of you. But blood is actually consists of 4 different parts here, okay? So you have the red blood cells, and that's the part that actually makes it red, okay? You have your white blood cells, we have our platelets, and we have our plasma. Now, you can be asked stuff on any of these here, and every single part of it has a role, okay? So when we think of blood as just this one liquid that's going through it, it is one liquid, but it's broken down into different parts, and because it has different parts, that means each part has a different function, okay? So if you think about, right, well, we know we have our blood for carrying things like oxygen around our body, okay? Absolutely. And it's oxygen, Jack, that makes you not tired. It allows you to, or do you still do like rugby and stuff? I remember you were doing that when you were little. Do you still do all that?
Yeah, football.
You do. So that's all energy. To get up and walk to your bedroom now, that needs energy, okay? In order to have energy, you actually have to have oxygen. So without that, we think of oxygen just in breathing, but it's not. It's so much more, okay? So we need our oxygen. Now, can you tell me anything about any of these? Now, we're going to go through them all, okay? And don't be totally honest. If you go, I haven't a clue what you're on about, just shout Jack, okay? So we know, and you're totally correct, our red blood cells, the function of it, and that's a big question that they'll ask, is the function of these. So that will carry your oxygen. Okay, so it's also going to have exactly what you said, hemoglobin. And do you know what hemoglobin is, or what the whole point of it is?
I just know it carries oxygen and it's rich in iron. But that's all.
Yeah, perfect. And the reason why, right? So you hopefully eat lots of meat, okay? If you think of your hemoglobin, it's kind of, I'm just going to call it heme. It's kind of like something that detaches the iron. So iron is Fe, so you should know that from your chemistry, okay? And it's actually, we need this here iron. You get that from your red meat, your broccoli, your green vegetables, because it's actually that part that connects the oxygen. So see if you don't eat enough meat, see if you don't eat enough broccoli, you won't have enough iron, which means you can't carry enough oxygen. So that's how they're all super connected. But that's a really, I'm going to write CQ anywhere that's a common question for you, Jack. And that's a real common question, is the function of your red blood cells. So carry oxygen and hemoglobin. Okay, so it's going to have, now it doesn't carry hemoglobin, but it's going to have hemoglobin. What about the white blood cells?
And they fight infection.
Perfect. They're all about infection. And can you tell me any types of white blood cells that you know about?
No.
So we've got 2 types, okay? And both of those, you're going to have your lymphocytes and you're going to have your phagocytes, okay? So, and they both work together, all right? Now, they have different jobs, but they work together. You have your platelets. Do you know what they do?
Is that like, that helps the blood, like cells absorb food molecules, like, help carry the oxygen?
No, wouldn't be for that. So what happens if you get a paper cut, Jack? What happens to your finger, say?
Starts to bleed.
Starts to bleed. Do you bleed forever, or what happens after a short period of time?
It stops.
It stops. How does it stop?
Like a scab forms.
Exactly, and that's to do with your platelets, okay? Right. If you didn't have platelets, okay, and you got a little paper cut, and you didn't have any platelets, you'd actually die, okay? Because your blood's going to keep pumping, it's going to keep letting it out, okay? So it's actually the platelets have a really big job of creating that there scab. And a scab is kind of like, do you know when you're little, when you'd fall and your mom would put a plaster on, okay? And that would instantly make you feel better. that's what the platelet's job is. It's kind of creating this like natural plaster over your cut, okay? You have your plasma, which is actually the liquid stuff that's kind of bringing everything round. That's more like what you thought the platelets was about. That one there's more about our transport, okay? Now, we do have to look at them kind of in a little bit more detail. Now, Jack, you're not going to be asked to draw these. These diagrams are way more complicated than you'd need, okay? But it's just to give you a little bit of representation of what they look like. Now, the first one we're going to look at, this one here is our red blood cell. Now, what you would be asked about them. So this is what, for each of these here, we have to know a function, and they may ask an adaptation. Now, if they're going to ask an adaptation, okay, of your red blood cell, okay, there's two things you can tell me about. And you kind of talk about, well, there's one big one, okay? Now, you are totally correct in telling me that it carries the oxygen around your body, okay? So if you think of a bag, right? So say you're going to the gym, okay, and you're filling all your stuff in to go to the gym, and you have to take a pile of stuff, grand. What happens if your brother says, right, bring my runners, or bring my towel, or bring my stuff? Doesn't mean you're going to have less room in the bag, okay?
Yeah.
And it's the same with your red blood cell. So your red blood cell, the whole point of it is to carry the oxygen around your body. So we have, in all our cells, we have a nucleus, okay? So what does your nucleus do in your cells, do you know?
It like controls everything in your cells.
Perfect. It's the control center. Brilliant answer, okay? So it's the control center in your cells. Now, that nucleus has a really big job, okay? But it takes up room. And the whole job of the red blood cell is to try to bring around as much oxygen as possible. So what's special about the red blood cell is it actually doesn't have a nucleus. And it doesn't have a nucleus, and that means it has more room. So if it has more room, what do you think that means for the amount of oxygen that can go around our body?
And carry more oxygen.
Absolutely perfect, okay? Now, we would say then, right, our function, you've mentioned, perfect, carrying oxygen. So the adaptation is its shape, okay? So when we talk about these, a red blood cell is described as a specialized cell, and the shape has changed. Now, the best way to describe your shape is like, you know, if you got a piece of like blue tack or Play-Doh and you rolled into a little ball and then you shoved your thumb and your finger into it, and what it would do is it would create like a shape like that there. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's known as a biconcave shape, and that's what's special about our red blood cell is it has this special shape, and because it has that, it means it has this large surface area, okay, which creates more room, okay, and the more room it has, that means it has loads of space for our hemoglobin. It has loads of space for our oxygen. Does that make sense, Pat?
Yeah.
That one's done, okay? Red blood cells done. Now, your white blood cells, we have to look at two types, okay? Now, we touch on it here, and then do you know your health topic? You kind of come back to it again, okay? Now, our two white blood cells, we have our lymphocytes and we have our phagocytes, and they're both up against disease, okay? So they're both trying to fight off our disease. Now, we're supposed to have a certain amount of bacteria, okay? You're supposed to come in contact with certain amounts of bacteria. But the ones that cause us harm, they're the ones that are known as pathogens. So we want to be able to fight those ones. Keep the normal ones, okay? The ones that are good for us, they're fine. But we want to be able to fight our bad ones, okay? And to do that, they work together. So kind of has a quick little summary of what they do. If you think of your lymphocytes, okay, your lymphocytes, and I will go into this in more detail whenever we do our health and disease topic, okay? Your lymphocytes, the whole role of it is to make antibodies, okay? Now, what those antibodies do is they're going to cause the pathogens, which is the bad microorganism, to clump together. And that's it. That's all they want to do. Because if we get things to clump together, they can't move around the rest of our bodies, okay? Now, there is obviously more detail of what kind of gets them to make this and all that, but don't worry about that now, okay? So that's your function of my first white blood cell is my lymphocyte, and it's just going to make antibodies. Now, your second white blood cell is your phagocyte. Now, your phagocyte is like Pac-Man, okay? Literally just like Pac-Man. It is just going to engulf and digest. Okay, so do you know the way we've just said how our lymphocytes are getting them all to clump together? So I have this little clump of rubbish that I don't want in my body. So what happens is like your Pac-Man, so imagine there's my clump of rubbish that I don't want. There's my Pac-Man there, and it's literally just going to come round, engulf it, go round it, and digest it to get rid of it. But that there, see those two words, Jack? That's worth 3 marks in a biology paper. Engulf and digest. That's all they're looking for. So don't, and unlike your mom telling you about English where you have to write loads, don't be writing loads. If I can get you to write 3 words to get 3 marks, I want that. Don't be writing me paragraphs, okay? So it's totally the opposite of what your mum will tell you for your English, okay? Now, we have this one here now is a little bit more detailed, okay? So this one here is about our platelets. And the function, okay? So we've said red blood cells carry oxygen and hemoglobin, okay? White blood cells fight infection. Platelets is for blood clotting, okay? So how it works, if they ask this in detail, there's a couple of words you have to know. So what it does, how it causes our scab to form is it causes a protein known as fibrinogen, and it causes us to turn into fibrin, and that's it. That's all you have to say, right? And that'll create a mesh, and that's your scab. So that there, the mesh network that we're talking about, is a scab. And it's a clot, okay? So when we talk about like blood clots, you automatically think, oh, they're terrible, they can kill you. Well, we also need our blood to clot. If we didn't have our blood clotting, it'd be extremely, extremely dangerous, okay? Because that scab, like even a paper cut, even like we've all fallen when we were little and had like infections. And basically when you get an infection, it's like the scab hasn't formed quickly enough. So it's going to let a little bit of bacteria in. And you know what it feels like? It kind of starts to feel a bit hot. And that's the bacteria working in it. And your body will then try to get rid of it, okay? Now, you have your plasma, which is the liquid part of the blood. And this is for transport, okay? So that is going to allow the transport of our blood, your absorbed food molecules, and we have to be a wee bit specific when we talk about our food. So your glucose, which is a fancy name for sugar, and your amino acids, which is when proteins break down, carbon dioxide, hormones, and urea, okay? Now, if we were to kind of do a summary of these, okay, all you have to know, my red blood cell, and I'm just going to write, you know what I'll write? I'll just go RBC, right? We know function, carry oxygen, biconcave. They're the most 2 important parts of it, okay? My white blood cell, I have 2 types, lymphocytes, phagocytes, and their role is to fight infection. We have platelets, and they're for blood clotting. And how it does it is it converts your fibrinogen to fibrin, and the fibrin causes your scab, and that's a mesh. And then the last one, your plasma, is all about transport, and we be specific in saying who it transports. So it's going to transport our glucose, amino acids, I'm just going to write AA for amino acids, carbon dioxide, hormones, and urea. And literally, Jack, see if you knew that and a question come up. That's literally all I need you to know about blood. That's it. Nothing else, okay? So don't be learning up piles and piles. If you can get it down to this here and make sure you know that, that's the big thing. Now, when we think about it, our blood is what has to get round our body. So if you think of a car, Jack, right? Your car is bringing you to rugby, okay? How are you getting there? You're using roads. That's your transport system. That's the exact same with this, okay? So your blood vessels will always be your transport system. And we've got 3 different types of systems, okay? So you think of like the dual carriageway, the motorway, little country roads. They're all different types of roads, but they all have the same function of carrying you from one place to the other. It's the same with the blood vessels. They're all carrying blood, but the type of blood it's carrying will be different. So if you look at your arm now, okay? So say your wrist there, you'll see like your blue veins, okay? And you'll be like, well, I know my blood's red. And your blood's red because of hemoglobin. But the reason why they're blue is because it doesn't have oxygen, and that's why they're going to be blue. And that decides as well is, we think about your heart. Your heart is like the engine of the car, okay? And it's going to pump your blood around your body in what we call a double circulation, which we're going to come to, okay? But sometimes it's done really like at high pressure, and sometimes it's on low pressure, okay? Like the speed on a motorway, all right? If you start driving at 10 miles an hour, the people behind you are going to crack up, okay? It's the same with this here. So some of our blood will travel faster and some will travel slower. Some's at high pressure and some's at low pressure, okay? So each of these have a different role. So we have your arteries, you have your veins, and you have your capillaries. So these are all our blood vessels. Now, again, you don't need to know this here, okay? So if we look at our artery first, what your artery, how your artery works, okay, or what it does is it will have a thick muscular wall. Now, see this here muscular wall? That's that part there, that red part, okay? And that there contains elastic fibers. When you think of elastic, Jack, what comes to your head when you think of elastic? So if I handed you like an elastic band, what do you automatically start doing with it?
Start to pull it, like stretched out.
Absolutely, and that's the word I'm looking for, stretch, okay? So this here artery has a really, really thick elastic wall. So if it has a thick elastic wall, what do you think that must mean in terms of stretching? Do you think it can stretch or not stretch?
It can stretch.
Absolutely, okay? And because it's so thick, that must mean that there's a fair bit of pressure in it, okay? Because if it was really thin, it wouldn't need to be that thick. So this here space that I have on the inside, this is known as a lumen, okay? And it's just like a tunnel. It's like where you drive through in your car, okay? So this here's your tunnel, that's your lumen, and that's where the blood is going to go through, okay? Now, look at this. Our blood is going fast. So if it's fast, it's going to be at high pressure. And that's why I'm going to need this here to have my thick walls. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you think of people like running really fast, right, down a tunnel, for example, okay, and we have loads of people and everybody's running super fast, nobody can really go backwards because you're all being carried in the one direction, which is different to my vein, okay? Now, if I'm walking through this tunnel, if everybody's walking, well, people can start turning backwards. And because of that, we would say our blood is slow in this one here. Now, look at the size difference, Jack, right? This here is quite narrow. This one here is quite big. So it's kind of like it has more room. So that would mean this one here is not under as much pressure. So look at the wall. Doesn't need to be as thick round because it's not under as much pressure. Now, what my veins also have that's special about them is they have valves. Now, the whole point of valves is to prevent backflow. So we want to prevent this backflow of blood. We don't want it going backwards. Now, the reason why, can you think of a reason why my arteries don't have veins? Not veins, valves, sorry. They don't have valves.
No, I couldn't tell you.
So it's because it's fast. Okay, so if you're going really, really, really fast, chances are you can't turn backwards. While with my veins, because the blood is going slow, it actually could potentially go backwards. So we don't want to let it. So we want to keep our valves to make sure that it'll only have one direction because we need our blood to flow in one direction only. So blood should flow in one direction only because we have oxygenated blood and we have deoxygenated blood, okay? And we can't have them actually mixing or be really dangerous, okay? So you also have your capillaries, and these have walls that are only one cell thick and they're leaky walls. So the best way to describe your capillary is it's tiny, like literally so tiny. And it's kind of like your linking system between your veins and your arteries to kind of have them attached, okay? Does all that make sense, Pet?
Yeah.
Yeah? So you have then, so this is kind of like a summary, okay? Now, what we have here is this goes into a little bit more detail. Now, this here, there is some names here that we haven't covered just yet, but we will. So if we kind of go from round here, right? Look at this diagram here. My lumen, which is like the tunnel part, is small, okay? So this is my artery here. So this is going to let my blood flow in this direction. Now, whenever I think of an artery, A for away. So it's always going to be traveling away from the heart. So our arteries will carry our blood at high pressure, okay? Now, it's at high pressure away from the heart. And because it's at high pressure, if we link this to what we had said for the structure of your vessel, that meant we needed thick, elastic walls to withstand the pressure. It's like if you think of pipes running into your house, okay? If you have a really, really high pressure water pipe and your pipe's really weak, well, it's going to explode. It's going to leak everywhere, okay? So that's why your pipe would need to be thicker to withstand that pressure. And that's the same with the elastic fibers in our heart muscle, or not our heart muscle, sorry, in our artery walls, okay? So these will carry oxygenated blood from other except with the exception of our pulmonary artery, which I'll show you in a second, okay? Now, it has no vein or no valves, and it's because the blood travels fast, that it can't actually go backwards. Now, if we look here, right, so there's my artery ones here. If we look here, here's our capillaries. So it's linking my arteries to my vein, but they're really, really, really thin, Jack, okay? Like your capillaries, when you learn about the, not just the circulatory system, say the breathing system from year 11, you learned about the digestive system, and you always learn about, you learn a little bit about the alveoli, and you learn a little bit about the ileum, okay? So they're parts, and you have to take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide, and it all goes through the capillaries, okay? It's like your network, it's like the blood system that's connecting everything. And these capillaries will carry our blood at low pressure, and they will carry both oxygenated and deoxygenated. So they're going to carry both, okay? So then you have our veins, which is this side here. Now, look at this. It's much greater, so I have a much bigger lumen. That's telling me my blood won't be under as high pressure, but I also have my valves, okay? Because I don't want my blood to go back up here. I want it just to keep going in one direction. Because my veins will carry the blood at low pressure, it will always carry my deoxygenated blood, with the exception of my pulmonary vein. It has valves, and we know our valves is to prevent the backflow. And we know we have valves because the blood is slow. And that means it's at low pressure. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. Have you any questions, Jack? I'm firing this stuff at you. So, this is the hard part, okay? So this is when we have to look specifically at the different parts of the heart now in a wee second, okay? And what they're all called. Now, that there diagram there comes up all the time, Jack, okay? That's a really, really, really common question, okay? Now, when we think of our blood is always going to be starting, it's kind of like it's not made here, but anyway, don't worry about that there, where it's made or anything. But your heart is the most important organ in your body, okay? And what it does is it's a unidirectional pump, okay? What does unidirectional mean? Any idea? So unidirectional. So any idea what uni means? Or mono? Means it goes one way, okay? So it can only flow one way, so I can't flow two ways. So if I look at my wee arrows here, right? Our blood is going to come out of our heart, it's going to come down to all these organs, right? Huge amount of organs, and it's going to come back round into our heart, okay? One direction. It's never going against this here grain, okay? It's also coming out of the top and going round here. Now, if you think of our heart here, okay, and do you know what I'll do? I'm going to skip this and I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to the end of the parts of the heart and do it first, and that'll be a wee bit. So we've looked at our heart, right? And if we think about it, we broke it down to our 4 sections. We had our left atrium, our left ventricle, our right atrium, our right ventricle. And always remember, the aorta is here, okay? And then you have your pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein, vena cava. So kind of, you can even think, right, well, the V's are opposite of each other, okay? So what's going to happen then is, if you think of your heart, right, the organ, the blood will always go towards it into the vena cava. So that's around this direction here, okay? And always as well, my pulmonary vein, that was the one up here. Remember, LORD. So Lord, left-hand side, that's going to carry the oxygenated. Our vena cava is bringing our deoxygenated background. The aorta and the pulmonary artery, they will always be carrying away. So this one, I'm just going to write D beside my vena cava because that was deoxygenated. This one here was oxygenated. Aorta, that was our oxygenated. Pulmonary artery was deoxygenated. There is a lot in that, Jack, I know that. With your lungs, you have your pulmonary artery. This is the one up here, going towards it, that was carrying our deoxygenated blood, okay? Because we're dropping off our carbon dioxide, taking in our oxygen. So oxygenated blood will be our pulmonary vein. And then once you see that word renal, Jack, renal is always to do with the kidneys, okay? Always, always, always. Hepatic is always to do with the liver, okay? So when we get to our kidneys, which is down here, your renal artery will always be carrying away, vein will always be going towards. So always think, when we think of arteries, with the exception of this one here, okay, it's always carrying away, A with away. So pulmonary vein, deoxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. Aorta, from the heart around the body, oxygenated. Vena cava, deoxygenated blood from the body back to the heart. Pulmonary artery, deoxygenated from the heart to the lungs. A lot of detail in that, but we've gone through it, okay? Just always remember, if you were to draw your wee diagram, and I think that's easier, okay? Split it into 4. You know you've one up here, one here, one here, one here, okay? Keep our V's opposite each other. So our vena cava, pulmonary vein, our pulmonary artery. So we have to keep our pulmonaries away from each other. Our aorta. And then we know this is my left-hand side. So LO-RD. And that will help you, Jack. That will make sure you know which side is our left-hand side, which is our right, which is deoxygenated, which is oxygenated, okay? So that's our first 4 of them done. Now, when you see the word hepatic is about lungs, okay? So once you see the word renal you think of kidneys. Hepatic, you think, not lungs, sorry. Hepatic, you think of liver. And so your hepatic artery will carry oxygen and glucose to the liver. That comes up, okay? We know our blood will always carry oxygen, okay? But if they ask for 2 things and you're not sure, you always write down glucose. That's the best. Glucose and amino acids, they're the good ones to write. So if you haven't a clue, they're the ones you talk about, okay? Now, this doesn't come up very often. So if I was kind of choosing what to learn and I couldn't learn it all, they would be the kind of stuff I wouldn't be too worried about. I'd make sure I've learned those ones there. They're way more important. So your hepatic portal vein will carry the digestive food from the small intestines to the liver. The hepatic vein will carry the glucose and amino acids from the liver around the body. Your renal artery will carry your blood rich in urea to your kidneys for excretion. And then the renal vein will carry purified, which is low in urea, blood from the kidneys to the vena cava. Now, at foundation level, Jack, I don't think they'll ask you those. It's still in your course, but I wouldn't be overly worried about them, okay? I would spend more time on other things. So you have your double circulatory system, okay? And that's how we describe what humans have. So it's generally mammals, okay? So our humans will have this double circulatory system. And what that means is it means that with every single circulation, okay, your heart will send the blood in 2 different directions, okay? So think about our wee diagram again, okay? We had 4 routes basically, 2 in, 2 out. So if I have 2 out, I'm going in 2 different places, okay? So we had said how in through pulmonary vein, down, round, out through the aorta, down to our body. That's like route 1. Okay, now do you see the way it's red and blue? I should have highlighted that. Red means it has oxygen. Blue means it doesn't. Okay, so we're going in, down, round to the rest of our body, back up. Happy days. That is one kind of full route. So from here, so all this here, that will be kind of classed as one route. Then what we have in the exact same point, right? So every time your heart beats, it's sending it out in 2 directions. So it's not like one beat it goes one direction, one beat goes the other. Exact same time, okay? So one is going to come up through here and then back round. So when we talk about your double circulatory system, it means the blood is going through your heart twice in one circulatory system, okay? In one go. So up here is route 2. So if we think about, right, imagine I had a piece of blood. Now I'm just making this here up, okay? That there little, I'm just going to do like a little yellow X. If I think about, right, well, if I'm starting here to go round, it's going to go round, back round here, back into my heart again, okay? But until I go back to where I started here, I'm in the heart twice. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's how we describe it as a double circulatory system. Now, the benefit of this circulatory system is that the blood travelling through the capillaries, we've said they're the really tiny ones in the lungs, will lose a lot of pressure, which reduces the speed. Okay, so we know every time we've been talking about this, we've said we're going from arteries through our capillaries. That's our linking system, through our veins. We know this was at high pressure. Okay, this is at low pressure. So that means something has to slow it down. It's the capillaries. Okay, so this is like slowing it down. And when I slow it down, I'm losing a lot of my pressure. So it reduces the speed because it can't go at high speed if I can't withstand the pressure. So by returning the oxygenated blood to the heart from the lungs, the pressure can then be raised again. I can get it back up. Does all that make sense? Because when you're adding the oxygen in, okay, you're putting more stuff in. It has to have like better pipes, okay? And that means I have to go back into my arteries because they're thicker, right? So if we look at our heart and we kind of learn about our heart first, and then we'll go back to that other slide. Now, your heart, think about if you had to, now they're not going to ask you to draw it, okay? Think about, when we think of a heart, we think of that shape. Literally cut it into 4, okay? Now, this is a bit weird. Whenever you're asked to label the heart, it's in reverse, okay? So it's like saying, imagine this is my phone, right? Imagine that's my heart there, Jack, right? So where my finger is here, I know that's my left hand, okay? However, if I was to take out my heart, turn it round, look where my left hand is, it's on the right hand side, and that's the same with your heart, okay? So when you're drawing a diagram or when you're labeling a diagram on your biology paper, it's literally like you have to imagine that's your heart that they're looking at. So if you were to take out your heart, you have to turn it around to actually see it. So it means that this side here is always going to be my left side and this is my right, okay? So do you see the way it's the opposite side?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big thing. That's a really, really, really important part, okay? Now, if we kind of go round and see what each part is, and then we'll do these wee boxes, okay? Now, if you look here, this is my pulmonary vein. Now, the function of it is it's going to return oxygenated blood from the lungs, okay? So there has to be a system. Now, how I remember my oxygenated, deoxygenated is lowered, okay? So my left hand side is all about the oxygenated. My right hand side will always be the deoxygenated, and we know this has to be left. So up here, this is my left atrium and this is my left ventricle, and it's always about your oxygenated blood, okay? Now, what happens here is your blood is going to come from the lungs. When you think of the lungs, what's the lungs about, Jack? What's the function of that organ?
Like bringing deoxygenated blood in and making oxygenated blood for the muscles to use.
Yeah, very good. So it's about gas exchange, okay? The whole function of your lungs is gas exchange. It's taken in, we take in air, and when we take in air, we get the oxygen from it. And then when we breathe out carbon dioxide, okay? They're both gases. So our lungs is always about our gas exchange. Always, always, always. So what we do is we take in this oxygen, and we're just like what we said, our blood is like a big transport system. It's going to bring it round to all of our cells. So we have your pulmonary vein, which is it has collected, your oxygen has been collected in the lungs, and this pulmonary vein has collected the oxygenated blood, and it's going to bring it into this here little part of the heart, okay? Now this part is called your left atrium, okay? That is the first chamber, so that's that part there. Now, do you see these little kind of weird looking yolks here? They're valves, okay? And the whole point, just like when we looked at our veins, what do you think those functions are? What do you think the point of those are?
Prevent backflow.
Exactly. Perfect, okay? So we can't have it come back out. So it's going to go from my left atrium into my left ventricle. Now, once it's in the left ventricle, it's going to come up here. Now look, I have another set of veins doing the exact same job, no different. And then what happens is it's going to come out through our aorta, okay? And that will carry the oxygenated blood at high pressure around our body, okay? So it is going to come down round our body, round here, right? Blah, 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 back round. Whole point, oxygen. Dropping oxygen as I go, okay? taking in the carbon dioxide. So now I've lost all my oxygen and it's come back up here through, now I'm at my right atrium. Okay, it's going in through here with no oxygen, down through, look, we've our valves again, into my right ventricle, where it's going to go up through here. Okay, that's my pulmonary artery, and it's going to go to the lungs again, because now it's rich in carbon dioxide, low in oxygen, and it's going to drop off like a train station. It's going to drop off the carbon dioxide, it's going to take in more oxygen, and it's just going to keep doing that. Does that make sense? And that's literally the heart and thing. Like, you could go into a million amount more detail, but what's the point? You don't need all that extra detail, okay? Now, you must know each of these, okay? So you have to know the aorta, the pulmonary vein, and you have to know round here, this is my vena cava, and this is my pulmonary artery, okay? Now, I don't really have kind of a quick way to remember it, okay? I just kind of know this one here is always your vena cava, and then A comes before any other letter. So I always think pulmonary artery, then I have my aorta, pulmonary vein. So you always have to have the aorta between the pulmonaries, okay? That's kind of how, it's not a great way to remember it, but it's just how I do it, okay? So if we go through this here, we part here. So we have our left side of our heart, and we know that will always receive our oxygenated blood. Always think Lord, okay? And it's going to receive, that blood from the lungs, and it pumps it under high pressure to the body. Now, the reason why it's under high pressure, Jack, high pressure means fast. We want oxygen as fast as we can possibly get it, okay? The faster we get our oxygen, the more respiration can occur. That's the releasing of our energy, okay? Now, the two sides of the heart is separated by this here part in between, okay? And that's known as your septum, just like your nose, okay? That wee part between your nose is known as your septum. It's the exact same with the heart, okay? Now, if you look at this, I don't know if I've put this in. Oh, I have here. Do you see this side of the heart here? Do you see? It kind of looks like it's a mistake. This side's thicker, okay? It's not. It's supposed to be. Did you get to do the dissection in school?
No.
No? So if you were to see it, and even like, if you were to hold it, right? I was going to say I should have brought, well, I had some in, it sounds a bit disgusting. I have them for school, okay? If you were to feel it, Jack, right, this side here feels thicker. You can actually feel a difference in the heart. And the reason why this side here is thicker is because it's at the high pressure. So just like we're talking about the pipes, if I have, like your dad's in the fire brigade, right, they're not going to have little flimsy pipes with high pressure because it's going to not do anything, okay? So they have to use pipes that can withstand the pressure of the water. So this is like, we have the really high pressured pipes, okay? Just like that there. So that's why this muscular wall here has to be much thicker to withstand that there pressure. So we have two sets of valves. We actually have three, but you only need to know about two inside the heart, which function to prevent the backflow, okay? So it acts as a unidirectional pump, okay? Now, that has come up. It's a bit of a sneaky little question because people kind of don't really pay much attention. And all that means is it pumps in one direction. Now, our valves, so just like what we had here, we have a set here, we have a set here, and you actually have a set here. Now, they're only counting them as one set, and those, it's technically three sets, but whatever, it doesn't matter, okay? When your heart beats, okay, so if you were to kind of just imagine your heart beating like that there is actually, and if you were to listen, you hear this, it's called a lub-dub sound, okay? And that lub-dub sound, okay, if you think of like a baby scan, you know that little sound of the heartbeat that you I'm sure you've seen it on TV, okay? Yeah. That's actually the opening and closing of the valves. That's exactly what that lub-dub, and that's what it's called, a lub-dub sound. Depending on which valves open, you'll hear a slightly different sound, okay? The walls of my ventricles, so this bottom side here, will always be that little bit thicker, and it's just because it has a bigger job to do, okay? So the atriums here are quite small because their job is just to pump the blood down to the ventricles here. But these ventricles here have a bigger job because they need to push it round. For example, this one's going to push it round the whole body, and this one's here is going to push it back up to the lungs. So this side here is always going to carry my deoxygenated blood. And once it reaches up here, it's going to go back to the lungs where it has the job of dropping off the carbon dioxide because it's going to diffuse out. And diffusion, Jack, is just a fancy way to say spreading of gases. Does all that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. Done. So now we have to look at your exercise. And this is always a nice question. This is a very simple question, okay? They might ask you, and they might link it to like a little experiment perhaps, where you have to look at the effects of exercise. So the heart will pump blood around the body in order to supply oxygen and glucose to your respiring cells. Now, when you look at respiration, Jack, you've done that at year 11, okay? Now, you've probably forgotten it, which I understand, okay? But when you look at your respiration, what respiration is it's the release of energy from cells, okay? It's not breathing, all right? Everybody writes down it's breathing. It's not breathing, okay? Now, in order to do that, what it is it's glucose. Glucose is a fancy name for sugar, okay? So we have our glucose. We're going to take in our oxygen from breathing. Blood's going to bring it round. And what I get is I'm going to get carbon dioxide and I'm going to get water. Okay, so that's what I have to get, okay? Now, your blood is going to carry both of these. So the blood carries this. Okay? Every cell in our body is going to respire. Every single one, okay? So during your exercise, the cells of the muscles respire more rapidly in order to provide more energy for muscles, okay? So respiration may be aerobic if exercise is moderate, or anaerobic if it's more intense. So that's like saying, right, like I know this morning, right, I did like a weights class this morning. Now, it was at 6 o'clock this morning, so I probably didn't push myself as much as I could have. So I wasn't overly out of breath. Now, I know when I do her class again during the week, she does like a full body one, and it's more cardio, and I will literally be gasping for breath. I will definitely be anaerobically respiring at that stage. Today, I probably wasn't, to be honest, okay? Now, when you are, like say if you go to the gym, Jack, right, and you're just lifting weights, okay? You're not overly out of breath, okay? Your muscles are working, absolutely. But if you're going for a run, you're trying to take in more and more oxygen. Your cells are respiring more. And that's your muscle cells. So always think M for muscles, okay? So because of that, you will need more oxygen. Now, and that's why, like, you're not going to get a stitch doing weights, but you could get a stitch while running because you're producing lactic acid. So if we have an increase in our respiration, so this release of energy, okay, that means I need more oxygen. I need more glucose, because I want to be able to try to get rid of I need to make as much energy, but I also need to get rid of as much waste as I can. Now, your nervous system, which again was a year 11 topic, it responds by stimulating a couple of things. So what it's going to do is the heart will increase to deliver more oxygen. So it starts beating faster, and the volume of oxygen that can be pumped around is going to be greater in order to give you as much of your oxygen as possible. Now, if you're doing exercise, okay, your heart rate will remain high for a period of time, as oxygen is going to be required to break down the lactic acid if it was anaerobic, okay? So this respiration that we had here, this was aerobic, okay? So that meant I needed oxygen. Now, if I have anaerobic, so anaerobic respiration is different. So that's when I just have my glucose. But what happens is I have no oxygen. So AN in front of a word in science means no oxygen. And that's going to give me lactic acid. Okay? And you'll get carbon dioxide. And lactic acid is what gives you a stitch. You know that feeling you get in your side? Okay? And how you actually get rid of it is literally like kind of pushing breath out of you. Like doing like that type of thing. Getting as much carbon dioxide out of you. That's what causes that there stitch, okay? Now, the time it takes for your heart rate to return to normal, that's known as your recovery rate. And now this is very stereotypical what we have to go through here. If you're very fit, that normally means that you could have quite a low resting heart rate, and it will take you less time to recover compared to an unfit person. Now, in real life, I know I would be relatively fit compared to most people, okay, or some people. Now, I have a really high heart rate, really high. So on paper, if you were looking at me, you go, Jesus, this one's about to have a heart attack, okay? But my heart can just withstand it. I just have a high heart rate, okay? So if you do happen to go to the gym and they tell you you have a high heart rate, don't panic and think, oh my God, that means I'm dead and fit. It doesn't always. Now, for biology and exams, that's what we are going to write. They're likely going to give you a graph, Jack, if they wanted to look at the effect of exercise. So they'll have something like this here, and they'll have like one person's here and one person's here, and you have to compare. That's what they're likely to give you. So say you and me, for example, okay? They'll go, okay, well, who's fitter? Well, what you'd be mentioning here is, now I'm going to just rub that out. Right, so say that one there was me and that one there was you. Right, well, so you'd say, right, well, you have a lower resting heart rate here, okay? So that's showing that you are fitter initially, okay? Mine's higher. Mine is going up quicker. So this is steeper. Okay, so that means it's going up faster. That means I'm trying to breathe more, basically. If you look here, I'm higher. You're lower. So you're fitter here. You're fitter I've made you the fitter one here in the whole thing because yours doesn't go as high. The other thing here is yours returns to normal quicker. So your recovery is quicker. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if they give you a graph to compare, what you need to compare is you always compare the resting heart rate. And the fitter person should be lower initially. You always compare the steepness of how to put it, the steepness of how high the heart rises. And then you would compare the time to get back to normal. And that's known as your recovery rate, Jack. So the faster you can get back, the fitter you are. Right, and what they'll likely give you is they'll likely give you a graph. This is actually part of your your disease topic, but I've put it in here. There's only 2 slides because if they're going to ask you about the circulatory system, they can link this here in, okay? So they might ask you about a heart attack. And what's special about your heart is made of a really important muscle. It's called cardiac muscle cells, okay? And what's special about them is they don't fatigue. So, for example, if I said, right, go outside now, Jack, and run around for 3 hours flat for me, right? You're not allowed to stop. You have to keep going. You're going to get tired. Your muscles are going to get tired and you're going to want to stop, okay? And eventually you will stop. Your heart, now don't get me wrong, your heart will be beating harder. But even when you stop running, your heart doesn't stop beating. When you go to sleep, your heart doesn't stop beating. It doesn't fatigue. It doesn't stop, okay? It will go slower, but it doesn't stop. And if it stops, you would die. The other thing about your heart is it's involuntary movement. You don't think, okay, I need to beat my heart. I need to beat my heart. I need to beat my heart. Because it automatically does it. So it's an involuntary muscle that just keeps going. So the heart is made of this cardiac muscle with which all cells in the body get a supply of oxygen, glucose and other nutrients, and it also is going to be responsible for removing the waste products such as our carbon dioxide. So it is such a huge role. And the heart is supplied to the heart by special arteries known as coronary arteries. Now what they are, it kind of looks like we can see our arms and you can see your veins in your arms, okay? And it's like that there. If you were to look at your heart, you'd see all these little lines, and those little lines are just little veins in it. Now, if you have what's called heart disease, what that means is it's caused by cholesterol and other fatty substances being present in high levels. Now, best way to describe it is, have you an air fryer at home?
Yeah.
Right, if you make like sausages or something in it and then you don't clean it, okay, and then you look at it, looks like this white stuff at the bottom of your air fryer. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the fat coming out of the sausages, okay? Now, that there fat, right, it was liquid it came out of the sausage, it was liquid. You didn't see it come out, and then it solidified and created that fat, okay? That's like cholesterol. And that cholesterol, it can also be called plaque, builds up in your arteries, okay? And it literally just coats it the whole way around it. So that cholesterol and that fatty substances will build up, and that's a really important word. If they're going to ask, about a heart attack, you're going to need that word. Now, over time, right, if we've said our arteries is the one that had the smaller lumen, that gap, that tunnel we talked about was smaller, okay? Now, That means if I start adding something around it, what is that going to mean for that lumen, Jack?
Not going to be as like a,
Absolutely. It's going to be a nightmare, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
what it's going to get smaller, okay? If you think about the hose pipes that your dad uses, right? If that's that size, and then if the fire brigade said, no, you're not allowed to use them, you have to use smaller ones, well, it's going to be a lot harder to put out a fire, isn't it? And it's the same with this. If I have smaller tubes, if I have smaller arteries, my heart is going to work a million times harder, okay? And it's going to get blocked way easier because it's a smaller area. So over time, what'll happen is if I have this build up, it's going to cause it to narrow and get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that makes it much harder for my blood to flow. So if my blood's flowing down here, this is a normal artery. This is what we would have, hopefully, okay? Like this here. Now, if we have this build up of plaque, of this build up, now cholesterol is a better word than plaque, right? Look how much harder it is. And how you'd know is because my blood here, it's going to have, my heart's going to work harder to pump this blood round, and my blood is under higher pressure. So that's when doctors can tell that there's something not right, because your blood is, you'll have high blood pressure. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And once that there happens, say this does get blocked, we can create what's called a clot, okay? So the clot is a blockage that's going to form, and that means the blood can't go anywhere, okay? And if the blood cannot get to the heart, that means we're going to have a heart attack. Now, you have to mention the word muscle to me though, okay? We know for respiration, it's every cell in our body needs oxygen. So the heart is just a muscle, like the muscle in your arm. Although it's a different type of muscle, it is a muscle. It means it has to have oxygen. So if I have no blood going to my heart, that means I have no oxygen going to my heart. And if I have no oxygen going to my heart cannot respire, and that means that the heart muscle will die, and that's what we want, okay? So, or not what we want, that's what we want to write down, okay? So always remember, if there's no oxygen to the heart, and that will be caused by the blockage, by the cholesterol, that means I have no respiration, and you have to have that in. So the heart muscle, and I need that word, that heart muscle dies, and it can no longer function. But without the word respiration, we wouldn't get our marks. And without using the word muscle, they're the key points. And although the heart is such a massive, massive role, it's still just a muscle. That's what it is. It's just a muscle. So how do we prevent this? So again, this is from the other topic, okay? So how we prevent our heart from getting like that is by looking at our factors, okay? Now, it's broken down into two types, Jack. You could have lifestyle factors, and you can have dietary factors. And they might ask you, they might say a lifestyle, so you can't mention food to me if they ask about lifestyle, okay? So we could have this would be dietary one, all right? So the likes of watching what you eat, okay? That means like less or no saturated fats, okay? Now, if you think about what we mentioned, sausages, there's piles of fat in sausages, right? So they're saturated fat. But if I gave you an avocado, that has a pile of fat as well. But they're unsaturated. They're healthy fats, okay? So it's not that we shouldn't have fats. We shouldn't have as many saturated fats. We should have less salt. Salt's very bad for you. I love salt, but it's very bad for you. It actually makes your blood sticky and it sticks to your arteries, okay? Now, in terms of our lifestyle factors, smoking, really bad. Lack of exercise, stress, and out of these here, as much as I love salt, and I do love salt, if I needed to give it up, I could give it up, okay? I don't smoke, but if you were a smoker, you may not want to give up, but you could give up. The one that's the hardest is the stress, okay? Nobody chooses to be stressed, absolutely nobody, okay? That's the hardest of them all, but that's the difference. So these ones here, they would all be classed as our lifestyle factors. So if we can control them, we can control our risk of a heart disease, okay? Now, if the blockage, unlike we've said about it going to the heart, okay, that would cause your heart attack. Now, if there's a blockage in the brain, you could end up with a stroke. So what we would do is, in order to try to prevent this, we could do something called angioplasty, and stents are often used. Now, what they are, and this here, see that there, the stents, they love to ask like a 3-marker common question of what happens in it. Now, it's a lovely question. So what you do, this here is your blood vessel, Jack, okay? So that's just your ordinary blood vessel. All this yellow rubbish around it, that's my cholesterol. So that's causing it to be much narrower than it should be. So what a surgeon would do is they would put this stent in, okay? Now this here, it sounds rotten. It actually goes through your leg, right? Like at your groin area. And they will feed this tiny little tube up to your heart, okay? Into your vessels, whatever vessel is blocked. So they're going to put this little tiny narrow tube up through the groin. Then what they'll do is they're going to inflate a balloon. Okay, so it's not very fancy. It's literally a balloon. But that balloon is surrounded by a mesh. And then what they'll do is they'll remove the balloon. But because we now have a mesh, it's like a cage to try to keep that there open. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the last thing that the doctors could do is they can give you some drugs, okay? Now, certain drugs that they might give you are known as statins, okay? Now, they'll also prescribe you most likely aspirin. And aspirin, how aspirin works is aspirin thins your blood. So if we think about the blood going around our blood vessels, and our blood vessels has now been narrowed, if our blood isn't as thick, if it's thinner, it's going to be easier to go around. So that's why you'll get aspirin. But they'll also prescribe you something called a statin. Okay, now a statin works by blocking an enzyme in the liver, which is actually needed to make cholesterol. Okay, so if we can't make cholesterol, I can't have a blockage. So this here would slow down the rate of the fatty acid building up in the blood, reducing our coronary heart disease. Now, just like what I said, the low dose of aspirin can be given to someone who had a heart attack or who had a stroke or risk of having one, and it's just going to thin it. And it makes our blood less sticky, okay? Now, this is just the advantages and disadvantages. Jack, that doesn't come up, okay? So don't worry too much about it. Now, some of the diseases are going to be closely linked, okay? So say you are overweight, say you have obesity. Obesity leads to type 2 diabetes, which can cause coronary heart disease, or it can also just cause straight up coronary heart disease. So you have to be really careful, and that's why people are encouraged not to be overweight. Does all that make sense, Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah.